ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Noisy Ghost Reviews. This one is a horror, not horror episode, which means I am, as usual, joined by Oliver Jiggins as we look at examples of horror in otherwise non-horror franchises. And today we are looking at the portrait for Troian from Season 2 of Quantum Leap. First of all, you may notice there's a slight difference to the setup today. I am not in front of a webcam, and
I am not in front of a webcam either.
in fact, you're also not in another country.
That is also true.
We are actually both in the same country, in the same room, with appropriate distancing, and are speaking out forwards so that we don't blah, blah, blah.
Yes, this is the climax of this series. 8 episodes in, it's all been building up to this. You must be so excited.
Well, I can tell you right now, Oliver, I am excited. Are you excited?
I am so excited, Ash / camera.
In your excitement, those of you watching or listening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell icon to be notified of when we post new content. Leave nice comments, tell people about it. You know, the usual YouTube stuff. The call to action. Today we have just watched together. We have watched Quantum Leap. An episode from Season 2. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with Quantum Leap, it's about a time travel experiment that goes a little wrong and involves an individual, Sam Beckett, traveling through time, leaping into other people. Now, if you don't know what that context is, leaping into other people might sound a little bit rude. It's not. Basically, so the rules of time travel within Quantum Leap are not entirely clear. Some suggest that Sam switches places with the people in the past, and there's simply a facade of them placed over him, so other people see him as them. And this is borne out in some episodes. There's an episode where he leaps into a man with no legs, and at one point runs. So that holds up the idea that he switches places. But then there's the idea that it's just the mind that switches, and again, there are episodes that bear that out as well. So it's not entirely clear of what the dynamics are of time travel. But either way, Sam leaps into other people in order to put right what once went wrong. So this episode was the portrait for Troian, which is from Season 2 and is a ghost story. Essentially, Sam leaps into a parapsychologist investigating the haunting of an old mansion. And the titular Troian is the person being haunted by the ghost of her deceased husband. If you haven't seen the episode, do go and check it out. I think it's available on some streaming sites. I think you can find it on Amazon Prime. There are plenty of places I think you can locate it. Do give it a watch if you haven't seen it. Oliver, first of all, welcome back to the UK.
I was going to say it's nice to be back, but that's a filthy lie. It is back to be back.
It is, yeah. The UK is a little bit caca right now, and things are a little bit crazy, but hopefully things will get a little bit better in the coming future. I mean, we're already able to record things in the same location with appropriate distancing, of course.
And that is what makes the world a better place. When Ash and I are in a room together filming things, you can tell the happiness is radiating through, and you are now happier people.
We may want to clarify the things we are filming. It's nothing like that. I mean,
so I'm not. Oh.
That's just to point out that is actually alcoholic hand gel, not lubricant. Which, fun fact, in my shows, when I get people to wipe down the nail before I hammer a nail into my face, I tell them that they're putting antiseptic gel, alcohol gel on the nail to clean it. It's actually just lube to make it easy for the nail to go in. What did you think of the episode?
I really liked it. It was, I suppose in some ways, it's probably the least horror-y, not horror thing that we've done so far on the show. But obviously, yeah, sci-fi, as we've said before with other things, does lend itself to sort of switching genres and from episode to episode because of the basic setup. And this definitely feels like a good Quantum Leap episode rather than a good horror episode. The show it definitely is being itself with the setup, but it's I've possibly seen one other episode of Quantum Leap, but I do think it's a great concept and it's really well done and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I agree. I was deciding on the Quantum Leap episode I wanted to bring, there was another option. There was one called The Boogeyman, which involves a young Stephen King and the devil and all sorts of really nasty paranormal stuff, which we might look at in a later episode. But for me, the portrait for Troian was always the spooky episode of Quantum Leap. And I think that's the way to describe it. It's a spooky episode more than it is a horror episode. For me, I find spooky entertainment more appealing than the slashery types of horror. So for me, it's still a horror episode, even if it isn't blood and guts and gore. And there's no blood and guts and gore in it. And one of the things about the episode is they try to find, and do for the most part, find non-supernatural explanations. So the character of Troian is hearing voices of her deceased husband saying, Troian. And it turns out that actually that's a tape recorder that her, spoiler, brother has hidden around to drive her insane so that she kills herself so that he can get some money somehow to pay off what he describes as some bad dudes.
But there is one exception to the everything is explained with non-paranormal needs, which is the kind of end of episode stinger when it is revealed that the housekeeper of the mansion has the same name and looks identical to one of the dead bodies in the lake, and then that housekeeper vanishes after the revelation.
See, for me, I don't mind ambiguity, but Quantum Leap has always very much promoted itself as sciencey. The central character, Sam Beckett, is very much science. And even Al, the hologram who accompanies him, he believes in paranormal and the strange, but he's also quite scientifically minded as well. I don't know. I don't think I needed to see the ghost disappear at the end. I think I would have quite liked it to be left ambiguous. They find this body of this woman who looks like the housekeeper with the same name. I think they could have just left it there, and then you could have gone away and thought, oh, well, she's definitely a ghost. Or you could have gone away and thought, well, she's just a descendant.
It could also have, it would have been especially ambiguous since the episode as a whole is about revenge, that you could have justified it to yourself as, well, actually, no, it wouldn't just be a coincidence that this person had the same name. Maybe this is someone that had somehow a grudge about the murder of their great-great-grandmother and therefore came back and was involved in the brothers' plot. And you could have kept the themes of the episode running throughout. An alternative explanation, which, while slightly convoluted, would still have made narrative sense. On the other hand, though, I think it's just a sort of end of episode thing to go out with a bang. So it's one of those things where I think you could almost discount it because, it's just a way of ending on some kind of high, like a big joke or something. So it's not that important if you don't like it.
No, and we kind of discussed this a little bit when we watched the episode. One of the first things you points out, and this is more about the episode and the world of the science fiction of the time rather than the horror element, but I think it's important to bring up. You mentioned the theme tune and the lightheartedness of it.
Yes, it's the theme tune is a very jolly and upbeat and exciting thing, which makes sense in the sense of that's what you'd want at the beginning of an episode. You'd want to get your audience pumped up and excited and ready for some more hijinks. But it's just interesting how that dates it, because nowadays, unless it's some kind of sitcom, then you would want something that is dark and foreboding and droning. It's obviously something like Stranger Things is not a comedy, but it is ultimately a show about children. It does have humor, but that would not be something you could tell from the theme tune, because it's all about atmosphere, and it's so rare outside of a sitcom now to have something which, irrespective of the actual drama within the episode, will say, hey, but this is entertainment and we're all gonna have fun, and are you ready, guys?
Very common within shows of this era, especially episodic shows. It's but just generally, I guess, shows of the era. The theme tune was fun and bouncy. I mentioned to Oliver that this also played out in things like Star Trek. Star Trek: The Next Generation has got this really great adventurous and even Deep Space Nine and Voyager, which have got more orchestral, almost somber in comparison pieces. They're still adventurous and they're still we're going to go on some hijinks here. And Enterprise even had a theme song to it. But now modern Trek hasn't got that. It is the modern Trek theme tunes are a lot more low key, a lot more somber, a lot more serious. We are a serious sci-fi show. And I think that's part of the charm of things like Quantum Leap, that they are serious to some degree, but also they allow themselves to have fun. They allow the show to have fun with itself. And you've got characters like Al Calavici, who is the hologram who comes through that only Sam can see and hear. And let's face it, a modern version of Quantum Leap would probably have to change Al quite a bit. I know you've only seen this episode and one other, but Al is, he's a hound dog. He's, if he was like a 20-year-old today, he'd be a fuckboy.
We do see that a bit in this episode. There's a joke when he's in the mausoleum going through bodies and he references an attractive blonde and he looks around excitedly just to see that it's a dead body in a wig.
I always quite liked Al. He's
Quote from Ash Christ. Nowadays he'd be a fuckboy. I've always quite liked him.
You can put that on my posters. Yeah, I have always quite liked Al. He's an interesting, fun character. And yeah, he is problematic by today's standards. And he wouldn't be written like that today at all. There's no chance of it.
At the same time, though, I mean, obviously you could say do it with a different way, but if you're going to have the main character who obviously is a lot of the time confused by what's going on and heavily involved, then you do need someone else there sort of that counterbalances that. And to have someone who's a bit sort of more relaxed and, isn't this interesting, and a bit more detached and easygoing and fun makes sense as an opposition. I mean, although obviously you could disagree with the way of doing that.
Yeah, he adds that levity to it as well, and he always keeps things light. But also Al, as we see from other episodes, a lot of the hound dog thing is real, but it's largely a front as well, because he is a very genuine, sensitive guy. There's a lot of stories about his life and how he was taken POW during Vietnam, and how he lost his wife when he was there, and I think his sister had Down syndrome and was abused for that by people, and so he's got a really well drawn character. He's not just this kind of fuckboy character that we see a lot, but I think we wouldn't see that as much, I think, in a modern retelling. But it's very different to Sam Beckett. But also in this episode, we see Al really coming through to help Troian at the end, when it's discovered that for whatever reason these seismographs or these voice recorders can pick up on Al when no one else can. He starts pretending to be a ghost in order to try and deter the brother from killing Troian. So let's look at the characters within it and see how they relate in the world of horror. I think obviously Sam's character is, I forget what Sam's character was named in this, Dr.
Urim Balding.
Yes. He's a parapsychologist. There's always parapsychologists in his world, and it's always in films. Parapsychology is an interesting topic of research, and I say interesting in that it is considered a pseudoscience by most sciences.
It was something that was interesting in this one, was that I noticed he wasn't an extreme. He was a scientist who wanted to find something like that, but it explicitly stated that he had never actually encountered it and did not believe that he had. So you weren't at that extreme, either one of a hardcore believer who learns to doubt himself, or the person seeking validation who then gets it in the story. That it was a lot more low-key than that.
Now, I think it's very important here to point out that you're talking about Sam Beckett rather than the parapsychologist he's leapt into, because we don't get a lot about the parapsychologist, but what we do get is that he probably actively does believe in ghosts and is looking for evidence to prove ghosts rather than looking for what evidence and what way it points.
Yes, but it's also said in the episode that he has never found it, which, although they don't explicitly say it, it does suggest, it doesn't sound like he's faking his research. So he is someone who, while a believer, is a scientist about it.
Yeah, he's not completely incredulous. He's not completely suckered in, but I do think there's...
And he hasn't created some ahead of its time technology that, well, manages to key into the holograms.
Yeah. There's a few other things as well, outside of the parapsychologist character, who is a staple in these types of things. If you look at things like The Haunting, obviously the central scientist character there is a parapsychologist. I think a lot of the time in fiction, people don't realise how fringe parapsychology is.
Even when Doctor Who has had horror episodes, Hyde has two. Well, I suppose you could debate whether they're parapsychologists, but they're definitely filling that role in the haunted house.
Yeah. So other characters within this, let's just get, I guess, the simplest one out of the way, which is the brother. He's a very, very two-dimensional character. His entire motivation is he's got to pay off some gangsters, which is I guess it's kind of in keeping with the type of gothic horror of the episode, that it is the type of thing that you would see in these kind of cheesy Hollywood takes, that he is very much a stock character. He's very much a stereotype. He's got nothing to him. He is
That's not true. He has a very good 90s version of a 70s shirt.
He does. And he also has wonderful hair. He has an entire mane of hair. He's like a lion of a man. This episode takes place in 1971, when I think everyone kind of looked like that anyway, with ridiculous hair.
And trying to murder your sister.
This is my lockdown cut. I kind of did this myself, because obviously you can't go and get your hair cut professionally because they will give you the space cancer.
I got ahead of the game 2 years ago by starting to shave my own head, which had nothing to do with baldness.
Mm-hmm. So that is basically it. The character's motivation for the brother is, there's nothing much to say about him, really, is there? He's going to kill his sister to get the inheritance so that he can pay off the gangsters in Las Vegas.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with the point, but it's slightly different to that, actually, because he's been using his sister's money to pay it. So it's not so much that he needs the inheritance to pay it off, is he needs to kill her before somebody notices that all the money is missing. Which, it's not a deep motivation either, but it's very slightly different.
And that does bring us on to the titular Troian, who we first meet as she's coming out of a mausoleum in a long flowing white gown, and there's kind of an implication that she's a ghost. And I think the stinger from the end of the previous episode just has, because at the end of each episode they kind of show you the first few minutes of the next episode and Sam arriving and oh boy. And so I think that's a moment where that happened, where it ended the stinger, and she just looks very ghostly.
And the first shot is just him holding a torch over a grave, which is very, very noirish.
Yeah. Oh, it's very noir, actually. I would say this is very much a gothic noir horror. So yeah, Troian is the widow of... I tell you, we've literally just watched this episode and I cannot remember her husband's name.
James' husband.
Yeah, it's kind of... It's something like Elliot or something like that. It's during the editing process, I will just flash the name up here so we can see what
just dub it over. His name, Ash, how could you forget, is...
It's Julian, you dipshits.
Mm-hmm. I'm so ashamed of you that I said that in your voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to make fun of you.
I know, it's a skill. And ventriloquism actually does play a part in this episode, because they believe, hearing Owl's voice, they actually think it's actually Sam throwing his voice, which is an interesting take.
Also very convenient, because obviously the voice would be coming from a different part of the room, and I feel like if there was someone you hated in your house and they were pretending to be two people and you wanted to get them out of the house, officially because you think they're driving your sister insane, and unofficially because you're planning on murdering your sister and you don't want them around, then maybe just getting mildly annoyed at this person that is pretending to be a ventriloquist isn't the best thing to do. But anyway.
I think this entire episode would be improved greatly if, instead of a parapsychologist, it was a ventriloquist.
Oh my god! That would actually be a great setup. You think you got a haunted house, and you're trying to get professional help and you can't get anyone, so you find the ventriloquist with his dummy under the mistaken that obviously this is some kind of Annabelle / Chucky type deal that this person has, and so you get them to come in and investigate your haunting.
Oh, I would watch that. Oh, a man and his possessed ventriloquist dummy who investigates hauntings and lays spirits to rest. Netflix, you've got time during lockdown. Get on this shit.
Hire us to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
We need the money.
Yeah, please. And it could continue from there. You could have various other circusy type characters coming into it from week to week. Like the killer clown trope obviously could come into play.
I think you always need a character that is haunted by their backstory. So I think we could have the actual ventriloquist doll that has a tragic past involving a circus. So we can keep having flashbacks and explore the motivation, why he helps to fight the supernatural.
Yeah, exactly. Get on it, Hollywood, now. So
ventriloquism.
Troian, we were talking about
Yes.
Troian. Interesting fact about Troian, Deborah Pratt, who plays Troian, was actually, I don't know if you noticed it during the beginning credits, but it says starring characters and Deborah Pratt. And then a little later on, it says executive producer, Deborah Pratt. She was one of the show's producers, who was married to the other producer, Donald Bellisario.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of nepotism for you.
And in the episode, she works with her husband, who then died while they were working together. So how did she actually feel about her husband in real life, one asked oneself.
And has Donald P. Bellisario died under mysterious circumstances?
That was one thing that was very interesting. I really wanted someone to question how you can pronounce someone drowned if you never found the body. But if you just have I was painting my husband and he fell into the water and drowned, and there are no witnesses and you can't find any part of it in this small lake, I feel like the investigation would have to go a bit deeper.
Yeah, like his body.
Yeah.
It was kind of convenient in that regard. That they didn't also dredge the lake. I don't know if I caught it. Did they say it was because it was too deep or something? I don't remember.
Yeah.
But Troian is an artist who is painting a piece for her late husband.
Nope, not doing it.
Who drowned when he was modelling and got bored after 10 minutes. But there's one really cool bit in it, and it's a painting. And there's a painting that she'd done, and she'd thrown it in the lake apparently, and it reappears back in the house. And every now and then more spirits and entities are added to it, and some of them moving around. And
it's always wet and dripping.
Yeah, it's always wet and dripping. Giggity. And it reminded me, there's an episode of Night Gallery where there is a portrait of the house, and someone's been buried. They died. They were buried in the graveyard out back. And every now and then you see on the painting it's changed slightly. First the coffin's out, and then a while later the coffin door's open, and then the zombies walking towards it, and then the last bit you see it's at the door, and then you hear at the real door boom, boom, boom. So it reminded me about that. That was creepy. I thought the painting was creepy. And again, did that get an explanation?
I was just thinking, I'm guessing the explanation is the brother was a good enough painter to impersonate his sister's style and add to it, I suppose.
I guess. I suppose we could also why would the ghost of the housekeeper, we'll get onto in a bit, why would she bring it back? Because you could say she bought it back. But if he's definitely adding to it because he's trying to drive her mad.
And you see both of their bodies in the water, which is what he wants to happen. So it's definitely, it's following his agenda. So I think the only logical explanation is, he is adding to it and is himself obviously a very talented artist. And we need more people to explore their art, because if not, they will go off to Vegas and get in with bad people and steal their sister's money.
So that's Troian. For being the central character within this, she ticks all the right boxes. She gets all the damsel in distress things. She's very much a believer, and there is a weird will they, won't they sort of subplot with the parapsychologist, which never quite made sense.
Because he seems a lot. I mean, unless she is an older actress who looks really good for her age, there seems to be like quite an age difference between the two. And yet there does seem to be some kind of romantic interest, which obviously isn't. It is possible for two people of different ages to be, but it seems odd considering the way the characters are set up.
Yeah, and also we don't get much of an idea of how long they've known each other either. I get the feeling that they've not long met.
Well, it seems to be the first time he's been at the house, and he
Yeah.
seems to have just arrived, and the brother doesn't seem to know him, and the housekeeper doesn't seem to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't seem like they've known each other long.
And he's, because obviously the real professor is in the waiting room in the future, and Al says that he's clearly got a thing for Troian. And that seemed a little bit, that's like an unnecessary subplot.
Yes, because it goes nowhere, and it would, since so much of the plot deals with the dead husband and guilt over his death, etc. It doesn't really bring much to her character that she's got someone waiting in the wings that she's interested in, while at the same time hearing her dead husband in the night. It seems. I mean, obviously, human beings are complicated, etc., etc., etc. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it doesn't seem like very neat storytelling to have that.
No, it doesn't. It felt very out of place. And it doesn't add anything at all to it. Especially because Sam is Sam. He's not the parapsychologist. And what was weird was a few times he comes very close to kissing her, which Sam Beckett has always, if I remember from what episode, he doesn't go straight in for the kisses when he has to. He does end up going in for them a lot of the time, but he usually, I think, if I recall, he seems a little bit more hesitant. Usually because he's just met someone. I might be misremembering things. It's been a long time since I've seen the whole series. But yeah, it felt like he was a little too into it as well. And it felt very, very odd and out of place.
Even from the point of view of the parapsychiatrist, we're assuming that he had only just met her, well, as in recently, which may or may not be right. But the fact is, this woman is a client who is under a lot of stress and thinks she's hearing her dead husband. And so there are multiple levels on which it would be very inappropriate to just sort of unsolicited try to kiss her.
Yeah, this is very much a show of its era at times, isn't it? Twitter would not respond well to this today, I don't think. So we've spoken about those. I want to speak about the character that gets not a lot of screen time, but is probably the most interesting addition because it is the ghost of Mrs. Stoltz, or Miss Stoltz, who is the ghost of a wife of one of the ancestors of the household. He was having an affair, and the husband found out about it, and he murders her, and he murders her husband, her lover, by throwing them into the. It was the butler, wasn't it?
The butler did her.
And he throws the bodies, he drowns them in the lake. I liked her. I thought she was interesting because she can hear Al, but more than that, because obviously other people can hear Al because of the machines, she can see Al.
You're missing the most interesting thing.
Am I?
The only truly skeptical character in this is the ghost.
Yes.
The only person who is not faking and genuinely just doesn't believe in ghosts and believes that the only people who do that are trying to scam the living is the dead person who's been dead for over 100 years.
Yeah. She's in a few scenes, and I like. Is she the one who locks Sam? She is. She locks Sam in the attic, doesn't she? Which I don't quite understand because Troian's in danger, and this ghost she wants her body found, doesn't she? She doesn't want Troian dead. So why is she keeping Sam locked in the attic when he was going to try and save her? Her agenda isn't to kill Troian.
No, but at the same time, she seems to have been part of the household for a few years, which implies that her being in the house has got nothing to do with the brother's plot. So she is at best a neutral force here. But yes, you're right. The door is closed. be completely accurate, we don't see her locking it, but we see the door close and then she's going down the steps. So it would be tantamount to a lie if it was in fact the brother who locked the door. But yeah, it doesn't make sense that she did that.
Yeah, that's a real inconsistency. There's some really nice elements in this, though. It's a well-told gothic spook story, and my type of horror has always been the spook story, more so than slashers and things like that. I mean, I like the Saw franchise. A lot of people don't, and they criticize it. I like I think the first few Saw films are actually clever films. The first one especially, and I kind of stuck with it because I got this completionist thing, and I kind of need to see the full saga of something. I can't just kind of leave it part way. And so I did watch the whole Saw franchise, and I enjoyed it. But that type of gory slasher isn't really my thing usually, and I like the Saw franchise for more than just the slasher elements. Like I don't like Friday the 13th.
He watches the Saw films for the story.
I watch the Saw films for the story. I do, and this episode of Quantum Leap falls really very much in line with my favourite style of ghost stories. And although it's got the cheesy 80s sci-fi-ness of it, and I could imagine this coming from an early 20th century gothic novelist. You know, if you remove the science fiction element, you've got a pretty solid gothic ghost story. And a fun fact, the actor who plays Mrs. Stoltz plays an almost identical character in an episode of Star Trek Voyager on the holodeck.
Are you saying they're part of the same cinematic universe?
Well, I mean, Star Trek never dismisses or discusses Quantum Leap, and yeah, so maybe they are. I mean, maybe we could add some extra material to Star Trek Enterprise, just have Captain Archer saying in some fan fiction or something, and I had an ancestor who was a quantum physicist. He went missing. We never found him. I think that's good. I'm adding that. That is now canon. All right. Captain Jonathan Archer is a direct descendant of Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap.
And since this YouTube show, is part of the Star Trek universe, officially that makes it canon, definitely.
Nanu. So, I think it's a really good story. I think it hits all the right beats. And if we remove the science fiction element from it, I think we've got ourselves a really good, really strong gothic ghost story. And it plays around. It plays around with what is real and what's. I thought my microphone fell down my shirt. I could just feel something moving down there. I was like, on the inside of my shirt, I was like,
Xenomorph.
But now the fact that my microphone is still in place and the fact that I felt that, I'm now a little bit like, what was in there?
You're wearing a blue shirt like the water of the pond. It's the dead bodies coming up after the earthquake.
So, yeah, I think we've got a very good gothic story now. I think it's a brilliant episode. And I think it is the best of the Quantum Leap horror-themed episodes. There's some darker episodes that aren't necessarily horror-themed, like we have in later seasons, we have the arc of the Evil Leapers. They're specifically called the Evil Leapers. And they're leaping through time to put wrong what once went right. Basically, they're recruited by the devil to go and screw around with history. And it's a nice little narrative, actually. It's quite good.
Best book of the Bible, this.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of fizzles out a little bit. But this is, yeah, I think the early seasons, like with a lot of shows, the early seasons are actually one of the best. And Quantum Leap was always really good at addressing various different characters and issues, and it was good at doing what it did. It had an opportunity to try out all sorts of things. It had issues dealing with feminism, had issues dealing with the civil rights movement. And although Sam Beckett can only travel within his own lifetime, there is one episode where he goes back to the Civil War because it jumps down his ancestral line. And so it's really good at addressing a lot of these issues. And it's a great show, and it does really well with what it has. So I'm just reading the guest stars in here. Guest starring Chubby Checker.
My favourite porn star.
Chubby Checker. Chubby Checker was a singer, was he not?
I don't know.
Chubby Checker?
I don't know that name.
Do you not know that name? Do you know? Those watching right now, do you know who Chubby Checker is? God, the more I say it, the more it does sound like a porn name, doesn't it? Hey, I'm Chubby Checker. Wow, wow.
I wonder if this is going to make it to the final cut.
If you just hear Oliver say that and you go, but nothing controversial has been said so far, it's because I cut it all out.
We weren't clothed fully for the most of the episode.
No, exactly. You don't want to know what I attached the mic to. So Quantum Leap's always done a really good job of dealing with various different stories and storylines. And I think this is one of them. It's done all sorts. It's done an episode where Sam has leapt into a chimpanzee, which is what creates the issue with the whole, is he swapping bodies or minds with them? Because if he's swapping bodies with them, the chimpanzee's like really tiny and he's like really 6 foot tall. So that would be a discrepancy. So in that scenario, it has to be the minds. What do you think? Is Sam swapping minds, or is he physically swapping with people? If he's physically swapping with people, explain the chimpanzee episode. If he's not physically swapping with people, explain the episode where he's leapy, has got no legs, and he gets balloons. Quantum Leap. Makes no sense. Except the fact that it is very good television. So kind of final thoughts on Quantum Leap, a portrait for Troian.
Well, I would have agreed with you until we actually had this discussion about both the horror thing and this episode in particular. I do agree, I think, about horror in general. I think over the last few years we have really moved towards the trappings of horror rather than essence of horror. Things like the Conjuring films. It's all these spooky houses that everything's falling apart in, and every child always has a very spooky toy box thing that sings that no child would really want to own, etc., etc., etc. And I don't think that's what good horror is. I think you can have something that doesn't look like a horror story, but is actually a horror story, and I think the best ones tend to be that way. On the other hand, I would have agreed about the essence of horror within the episode up to this, but now that we've had this discussion, it seems like this episode could have done a bit more to make its plot make sense, in that it sets up a lot of things, and some of them are really good, like the earthquake,
of course, yes,
which brings back the bodies and plays part in the attempted murder when she's falling about the place and the brother is trying to make her fall into the lake. And we also have, obviously, them being able to hear the hologram, and that tying into the technology which is being used, which is actually only picking up other pieces of technology because the voices are actually coming from different radio transmitters, etc., etc., etc. But we have this entire problem with the housekeeper, the only supernatural part of the episode. So it breaks the rules in that sense, and I don't have an issue with it. Like I said, I think it's a stinger, but on the other hand, apparently she is responsible for locking the protagonist upstairs, and since we don't categorically hear that the brother is a good painter, that he either fished this painting out of the water or repainted it himself in a way which even the artist couldn't tell was a fake, and then has added to it over months, means that is potentially a supernatural element as well, which isn't entirely explained. So maybe since the housekeeper is doing things which just don't make sense, maybe that is also her. I mean, we also have the entire story of the curse going back hundreds of years,
which was a weird one, because it's a curse that's only affected a couple century and a half ago, and
they've said they've all had unnatural deaths, and they've said 3 of them were drowning.
Okay.
So we can assume that there's been loads and loads of other ones since then. But yeah, so I guess we could explain the housekeeper is there just because of this curse. This curse brings back some of the dead, and she's got unfinished business because her body was never found. But in that case, why does she hate the paranormal psychologist who comes in?
She must know that it's Sam Beckett then, because if she can see Al, she must be able to see Sam as Sam.
Okay, so but why does she either not bring it up or instinctively dislike him because of that?
I don't know. That doesn't make sense either, because it's not stated that she can see Al, but it is heavily implied because she looks at him and makes a comment about strangers. Then looks back at Sam and then leaves.
Maybe she is not a ghost and actually just a personification of the curse. So she is actually trying to kill Troian, not sort of personally, but simply keeping the curse going. And therefore, she is either letting the brother do his duty, do his stuff, or every now and then nudging him along, like locking the door and trying to get this man who's trying to help the sister out of the house.
See, I think if we were to take this as a story and remove it from the Quantum Leap reality, I think you could play around with the idea that this is a vengeful spirit who is angry about their own demise and death and that's why all of the ancestors have unnatural deaths, because this spirit is angry at the family line, because remember she's the wife of Cosgrove, is it? Something it's
Ash, it's
Boaty McBoatface.
and so she's angry. That could make sense actually, that she's causing all of these unnatural deaths because of her anger at being murdered by him.
and therefore she vanishes because the curse is now over, because her body has come to light, literally, and that ends that injustice, so to speak.
Yeah. Donald P. Belisario hires in 1989. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's one of my favourite episodes of Quantum Leap. Quantum Leap is one of my favourite shows. It's a brilliant show, and I do really suggest, if you get a chance to go back and watch.
It's one of my favourite shows that I've never seen. Well, that I've seen very little of. I do love the concept and I want to watch more of it. I just haven't got round to it. And this was a good episode. I just feel like, again, unless we're missing something really obvious about the role of the housekeeper, and it's possible that we are, so feel free to let us know if that is the case. But it feels like there's a slight laziness because they establish some red herrings which don't really make sense once you have the full story. And while that is something that happens a lot in storytelling, it isn't okay and it shouldn't be, and I am not letting them get away with it 30 years later.
No, I agree entirely. So, Quantum Leap is a brilliant show, and I think Portrait for Troian is a good episode. But now we come to the part of this episode, where we kind of give it scores. Now, let's see, the first point we always bring up is appropriateness for horror. Out of 4, I don't know, I think that the story ticks all of the right gothic noir points. It hits all the right beats. It's got some unexplained bits to it, but I think it is appropriate for horror. I think it fits the horror theme, and I think the world the show creates within it also works. So I'm going to give it I'm going to give it a 3.
I'm going to give it 2. It's difficult to explain because the setup does work and the story does make sense within the universe. But I feel like the side of technology and the supernatural don't quite mesh in a way which they could have, and they had all the building blocks to do it, and they do partially use them. But there's a few bits missing there in the backstory and what is told to us in the way it is explained. And since it doesn't completely wrap it up either, I'm going to go with 2 here.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. The next point, threat to life. You'd think that 8 episodes in, we would actually know these. If you've been following the series, you'll know that right from episode 1 of the Horror Not Horror thread of Noisy Ghost Reviews. We've kind of rolled with it with the whole scoring mechanism. The
series has a 3-act structure. We started off with 1 act where we didn't know what the criteria were. Then we had a preliminary phase where we kind of had them, and now we've reached phase 3 in which we've forgotten them.
Yeah. Wait for the climax.
That's what she said.
Yeah. Body count or threat.
Well, body count, we actually have at least 4 deaths in this, because we have the 3 bodies that are dredged up the lake at the end, all of which were murdered and are an integral part of the story. We have the brother whose body is not found, but who is definitely dead. So we have actually got 4 deaths as part of the main plot of the episode.
And there is definite threat to Troian. To be honest, outside of Sam Beckett, every character in there is either... and Al, everybody's outside that.
Well, he doesn't have a body, so...
Exactly.
We only have 3 characters that have bodies in this episode.
Yeah, and they're all... There's a threat to all of them. So, I'm gonna give it a 3.
I think I can. No, okay, too far. I'm gonna go with the 3 as well because yes, we actually have 4 deaths here with main threats to more characters outside that, and the main threat is part of the story, as are the deaths of all of the characters. You would not have any part of this story without those deaths. The climax of the story and the entire existence of the housekeeper hinges on those deaths over 100 years ago. The threat to Troian is the center of the story and the source of the tension. The death of the brother is the resolution to that, and the death of the husband is what kicks all this off 3 years ago. So yeah, I think we definitely have 3 out of 4 for this.
Okay. So the next one would be memorability. How memorable is this episode? I mean, for me, the fact that this was the one I instantly went for, out of all the potential episodes that we could discuss to do with horror, not horror, this episode was one of the first I thought of, and it was the one that I went straight for with Quantum Leap. So I think I'm going to go with a 3. I'm 3 for 3.
I have to come to this from a completely different perspective in that I haven't seen the rest of the show. So in a way, I guess you could say I'm being a bit hypocritical here, but I wonder whether this would stand out for me. And I could not wonder this and simply take Ash's word for this as the person who has actually seen the entire thing, and he says it stands out. But I feel like this wouldn't stand out as an episode simply because it doesn't go hard enough with the supernatural / horror elements or their resolution. So I feel like this is more of a Quantum Leap episode. Speaking as the person who hasn't seen much, if any, of this, than it is a horror one. So yeah, I don't want to be. I'm only going to be a partial hypocrite here, as opposed to a complete hypocrite. Does that make sense? Would you agree with that?
I think that's fair.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it 1 out of 4 for this.
Okay. So how scary was it? I'm gonna say 1. It wasn't scary at all. It had creepy elements, but I wouldn't say any of it was particularly scary.
I'd agree with that one. We've been keeping track of the
Yeah,
scores here.
yeah,
Okay,
about
cool.
17 so far.
Okay.
So the final point. What is the final point?
Does it stay with you?
Memorable. We've already done that. Appropriateness for horror we've done. Memorable.
Body count.
Body count. Is it scary? What's the 5th one? Whilst Oliver finds out what point number 5 was, during lockdown I've been baking, and I've made biscuits, and I've made cakes, and I've made flapjacks, which I call Jackie Flaps. I like Jackie Flaps. You may have to go to YouTube and actually play an episode. So
Oh, villains.
one is the threat of the villain, and I'm going to have to give this a 1. If we're going to count the villain as the brother, he's not much of a threat at all. He's a very two-dimensional. I mean, to be absolutely honest, if you look at him, he's kind of a weedy guy. I'm surprised that in the original timeline he did manage. No, he didn't kill her. No, she killed herself, didn't she? Well, that's the implication. Because yeah, he's not much of a threat. Although in the original timeline, I guess he did succeed. So
Well, I guess it's a definition of how we define threat, but I would say that we could include the sort of overall tension of the story, because like you said, we do find out that she dies in the original timeline, and that is what he's trying to stop. And we have this entire question of what is actually going on and the curse, etc. So I think we can potentially package all of that, whether that is real or whether he's simply using it. Since we only find out that he's the villain and has a very, very basic motivation and isn't very good at doing it near the end, for most of the story, the villain is the means that he's using. So since the story wouldn't work and you just wouldn't be engaged at all if that threat didn't make sense, I'm going to push that to a 2.
I think I agree, actually. I think I'll give it a 2 as well. Which brings the score for Quantum Leap, a portrait for Troian, to 21. So that is the final score of the final discussion of this series of Horror Not Horror. The Noisy Ghost reviews will continue with myself and Oliver discussing various topics, and then myself and Noni discussing topics as well. And me and Oliver are going to be starting a new kind of thread along the Noisy Ghost reviews, and we're going to be looking at childhood chillers for around 6 to 8 episodes, where we'll be looking at mainly movies, because I'm discussing television stuff with the other thread with Noni. So we're going to be looking at mainly movies.
Also, to avoid more Doctor Who.
Yes, to avoid more Doctor Who. Although there is a Doctor Who movie, which isn't scary, unless you consider it scary in terms of badness.
Or the fact that the Master suddenly becomes a Terminator ripoff.
Yes. So we're going to be starting a new chain, a new thread, Childhood Chillers, where we're going to be looking at movies from childhood. And I think I'm really, really desperate to talk about Hocus Pocus, mainly because I've been to Salem, and also because...
the real horror, it's just going to be an hour of Ash's holiday snaps.
Yeah, and child me had such a huge crush on Sarah Jessica Parker in... she was hot in that movie.
No, that's... Sorry, it took me a second to realise which one that was, and I thought you were talking about the leader. For a second, I thought, interesting. I mean, charismatic, strong performance from
Bette Midler. Let's not kink shame.
No, but from a child's perspective, that is an interesting...
We'll be looking at... so we've got Hocus Pocus as one of them, and there's a few other ones that we'll discuss that we're going to kind of look at and review. And so they should be starting...
He's not going into which ones simply, for a bit of tension, not because we don't know them.
Because we are, as you've seen from our scoring section, always on the ball.
Series 2 is going to be so good. Imagine how much we're going to remember this a year down the line.
Yeah, we're going to have to rewatch some of these episodes. At least for last.
He said with dread. We're going to have to entertain ourselves with ourselves.
So, thank you very much for watching Horror Not Horror. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you really want the thumbs up, I don't blame you if you'd rather smash the dislike button, because that doesn't actually affect the YouTube algorithm, so go crazy.
Also, if you could add a comment, we're not asking just generic comments, we want specifically the list of what we score things on.
Please.
If you could add them to every video that we've done.
That'd be really helpful for us.
Yeah.
So we can just kind of go back to them and load up the comment section. One of the few times where you should read the comments. So yes, please.
You should always read the comments, Ash. We care about people.
So a lot of the times the first comments that go up are within seconds of the video going live, and it's someone who says, really loved that, and it's like, you haven't watched it, you're a bot. You're a bot. You're a bot. If you haven't made it all the way to the end of the video and you've clicked like, you might be a bot. You might not be a bot.
So apparently we have a #1 fan and Ash doesn't even believe they're real.
No, I don't. No one likes me.
Are you a supernatural housekeeper who doesn't believe in the supernatural?
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Ash Price.
I've been Ash Price too.
And please, do have nightmares. Just realised my towel, my washing is being viewed all the way through this, along with the dead flowers.
Well, the dead flowers are atmospheric.
Yeah, exactly. They are appropriate and suitable.